Support for this episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is made possible by the Wessex Press, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wessexpress.com, and the Baker Street Journal, the leading publication of Sherlockian scholarship since 1946. Subscriptions available at bakerstreetirregulars.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 150. Elementary.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became a chronicler.
In a world where it's always 1895, comes I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we discuss goings-on in the world of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, the Baker Street Irregulars, and popular culture related to the great detective.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
Well, welcome once again to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
And I'm Burt Wolder.
Elementary, my dear Wolder. How are you?
I'm of the elements. I'm carbon, oxygen, a little bit of hydrogen, and who knows what else. And some base metals that we needn't speak about.
Reminds me of Rodney Dangerfield, who once said, "Hey, I'll tell you, I'm a water sign, my wife's an earth sign. Together we make mud." Elemental indeed. Well, here we are at the 150th episode. Did you ever think we'd make it?
No, and it's a shame we missed it, isn't it? You know, I'm so sorry that I was in the bathroom at the Oh, wait a minute. No, we're doing it now. Good grief.
I wondered what that echo was.
Huh.
The acoustics in there are marvelous.
150 episodes.
Yeah.
No, well, that's not, I mean, it's not as impressive as it really sounds. I mean, we've been doing this, 30, 40 years, haven't we? So that's, that is, it's not even.
My math is correct.
Well, it's not even 10 a year, so.
Well, once again, we are here. It's 50 episodes past our 100th episode, so there's a lot to pack in here. We'll be introducing our guest in just a moment. But before that, just a reminder, you can reach us on all the social networks at I Hear of Sherlock. You can email us at comment@ihearofsherlock.com. You can find the show notes for this episode at ihose.co/ihose150. That's ihose.co/ihose150, all lowercase. Drop on by there. Let us know what you think with a comment. You can certainly comment to us on Twitter or on Facebook. And we would always love your support in whatever way you can manage it. Financially, we have options there on the website, or it would also help us a lot if you gave us a rating and review for the show. Help other people find it. And of course, share this with every Sherlockian you know. The more people that hear about this, the wider we get to cast the net, and the greener we get to keep Sherlock Holmes's memory. And speaking of green, why don't we hop over to the pastures of Wessex Press?
Here in the ancient Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Wessex, we pause in August to recall the bravery of the last Gothic king of Spain, Don Roderick, at the beginning of the 8th century. But you're lucky. You don't worry about being killed by Saracens. Your abundant leisure gives you plenty of time to enjoy 3 books, all new this year from our WessexPress.com. House of the Doomed, a new adventure of Sherlock Holmes by Dan Andriaco. 70 Years by Gaslamp, the illustrious client's 6th casebook. And Baker Street Reveries, a new collection of essays by Leslie S. Klinger. to see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wild flower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. Now's the time to pause and enjoy new books from the Wessex Press. Choose them today. Ah, those happy people. I can almost hear the sounds of the scythes going as they begin to sharpen up and get ready for the fall harvest.
Oh, it's coming. It's coming. Well, always a pleasure to hear from the Wessi. Our guest this time around is James O'Leary, who's been a Sherlockian for over 30 years, or at least considered himself a Sherlockian. And he says it's always been a solitary pursuit. That is until about 10 years ago. He went onto the internet and found that there were, well, other people like him, other Sherlockians who had this unique pursuit, this unique habit. And he happened to, well, listen to our show once or twice, and that inspired him to seek out other people as well. James is a member of the Speckled Band of Boston since 2012 and corresponds electronically with wonderful and generous Sherlockians from all around. And more importantly, he has been an intrepid writer for us on iHearOfSherlock.com, where he has faithfully covered the topic of Elementary, the CBS television show now in its 6th season, starring Jonny Lee Miller and Lucy Liu. And we are pleased to welcome James O'Leary to the program. Hi, James.
Hi, how's it going, Scott? Hi, Burt.
Hello, James.
We're doing well. We're delighted that you could join us.
Well, I'm delighted you invited me.
Well, James, as we ask everyone, their first question out of the gate, and if you've been listening to us for as long as you say you have, you should know this one. How did you first meet Sherlock Holmes?
Well, when you're young, there's Sherlock Holmes is in the atmosphere. I remember watching the Mr. Magoo episode where he was Watson to Holmes's Sherlock to Holmes in The Hound of the Baskervilles, and of course Daffy Duck is one of my favorite Sherlock Holmes, and but I didn't really meet Sherlock Holmes, I like to think, until 6th grade when I had to read The Hound of the Baskervilles, and I still remember that book. It was from Scholastic Books, as most kids still today get in school, and it was printed on green paper with green font, and it was called Easy Eye. So that way, if you were sitting outside reading it in the sun, it would be easy on your eyes to read. So that book really made an impression on me. Also, it was a little bit above my my reading level. I didn't get the Holmes's joke on saying that he shouldn't have let the moon rise behind him when he was standing on the tour. So in junior high, I read The Adventures and Memoirs, and they had this bound library copy that had both of them in there. And when I got to the end, and this book was very old, and it had like coffee stains or whatever on the paper. But when I got to the end where Holmes is gone over the Reichenbach, I could believe that those were like dried tears of previous readers reading about Holmes's death. And then in high school, I discovered the whole canon, and our school library had the Baron Gould annotated, and so that way I really got into the higher criticism, and I started to check out books on that. as well. And also during high school was when the 7% solution came out. So, that was the great boom of the 70s. And so it was very easy to find Sherlockian books at your bookstore. It was a really good time to be a Sherlockian then.
No doubt. Now, that's probably one of the few times I've heard of a high school library being stocked so well that it had an annotated Sherlock Holmes. But, given the time frame there, I think I could see how it made sense. I think the book was published in 67, 68. So,
and so we're talking, 74, 75, 76 around there. So.
Oh, good.
It was like 94, 95, 96. That's what I meant to say.
Yeah, right. Well, I think you're the first guest that we've had who has shared with us a memory or who has even had the experience of reading Sherlock Holmes in the Easy Eye text. So that's fascinating.
But there must be one or two others. I know because every one of my class had to read it.
Yeah. Well, those scholastic, the book orders that you did, you get your sheet of paper with all the selections on there. You check off what you wanted. You paid your $1 or quarter or whatever the amount was at the time. I just remember, waiting, on that, whatever day it was Wednesday. It was book delivery day from Scholastic. The teacher would crack open the box and, hand out everyone's order. I just remember the excitement in the air for me personally. Reading like that. It was a wonderful thing.
Yeah, me too. And before I read The Hound of the Baskervilles, I was a big Encyclopedia Brown fan. So I was always looking forward to like the next Encyclopedia Brown book to come out and try to match wits with America's Sherlock Holmes and sneakers.
Yeah,
I wasn't always that good at it.
Yeah. So, well, let's dive right into the heart of things here. On I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, both the show and not quite so much in print because you've been a part of this, but certainly on the show, we've kind of neglected elementary, almost as the redheaded stepchild of the popular culture, and I want to hear from you. Do you think that's right?
No. Let me say first, I really am a very traditionalist Sherlockian. If all the TV shows and movies disappeared, as long as I had the canon and the higher criticism, I wouldn't notice. And I was very much a fundamentalist when I was growing up. Even though I liked the 7% solution, I wouldn't go see the movie because Watson was played by an American. And I didn't watch Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce on TV because those were set in the 40s. I didn't really know about the first two. But, I said, they didn't live in the 40s. They lived in the Victorian era, so I'm not going to watch those. So I was very much a fundamentalist type. And over the years, I've mellowed in my appreciation of the Sherlockian media. And so for me to like elementary as really a tradition, I think that says something about the show.
Yeah. Now, did you begin watching the program when it premiered, or did you get sucked into it later on? How did your association with the program come about?
Well, like everyone, I saw the BBC Sherlock, and while I liked it, I wasn't blown away like a lot of people were. I thought the first episode was excellent, and if the rest of the episodes carried on at that level, I'd be very happy. But even like the first season, it really went downhill quickly. So I was, paying attention to the Sherlockian world when they were talking about Elementary when it was first coming out. And, there was a lot of controversy. People thought it was just going to be, a ripoff of BBC Sherlock. And because it was made by Americans, had to be a piece of crap. And I decided, I would watch it and give it a chance and see how it was. And, the pilot, as like all pilots for TV shows are, I mean, they're okay. They're not, the best episode of the show. It's basically something there to sell to the networks and say, this is what our show is going to be like. So, I watched it week after week, and I was really impressed with Jonny Lee Miller's acting, and I was never really a fan of Lucy Liu, but she was incredible. I thought she was very excellent as Watson, and I just couldn't understand why it was getting just such negative press from Sherlockians. It was almost like BBC Sherlock came around first, and because it's British and it's on the BBC, it has to be great. And the American show comes along, it has to be just a cheap knockoff. And it was almost like people were picking sides at that point, even before the show came out. And if I thought the show wasn't good, then I wouldn't have stayed with it. And I've watched it all these seasons. As a matter of fact, I was watching it and it went downhill in quality, like in season 3 or 4, I'd stop watching it. But the show is just really, really good. It's very well done. There's the writers really pay attention to the canon. But Robert Doherty said when he was being interviewed before the show came out, he was more interested in telling his stories about Sherlock Holmes rather than redoing stories on the canon. He's really stayed with that, and he's also made the point that Holmes and Watson are friends, so they'll never get together. And that was one of the things, like, just as the show started, they're saying, oh, Holmes and Watson will hook up, and, they're thinking it's going to be like another Moonlighting or something like that, or, Castle, some sort of ridiculous show like that. And really,
well, you draw a very interesting distinction here, and I think you said it very well. The BBC Sherlock was basically built around the premise that as Holmes was a real-life influence, a real character in Victorian England, what would it be like if today he was in, today's London and today's England, and what they have tried to do, sometimes successfully and sometimes in the view of viewers like me, less successfully, taken the original stories, elements, cases, puzzles that Holmes encountered in the 19th century and sort of applied them in the 21st century. But Elementary has a very different premise. So I'm curious because, at a very high level, the basic conceit about Elementary is that Sherlock Holmes has had a crisis, and he is, as part of his drug rehabilitation, he is forced by his father to live with a sober companion, who in this case is Dr. Watson. So what carried you over from your sense and sensitivity to the traditional structure of the stories, the traditional characterization of Holmes, into this? I mean, what got you over that bridge?
Definitely the acting. I think really Jonny Lee Miller has worked very hard to capture a Sherlock Holmes. I like to think of the Holmes media as like, say, Shakespeare. I mean, you have the plays, and you can have, whatever favorite actor is in there. I mean, if you like Laurence Olivier as Hamlet, I mean, that's great. If you like Ethan Hawke as Hamlet, that's fine too. Maybe you like Mel Gibson as Hamlet. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But each actor brings their own vision of what Holmes is. And I like Jonny Lee Miller's vision of his Holmes. And I also like the fact that they reversed elements of the canon. Holmes and Watson meet. They become friends. Later on, Watson finds out that, Holmes has, maybe addiction, or, he uses cocaine, which was, of course, legal at the time that Holmes was using it. And, Watson objects to that as a physician. And then it's hinted at in the later stories that, it became a mania that almost ruined his career. And I like the fact that to make their Sherlock fresh and in the 21st century, they reversed it. Sherlock has had his addiction, and in this case, it's heroin instead of cocaine. And he has to work with Joan to get sober. And through the course of the very first season, you watch their relationship evolve into a real friendship. And that's one of the things even Doyle didn't do in his stories. He didn't show us Holmes and Watson becoming friends. He wrote, Study in Scarlet, and that was just, the introduction. And it was a one-off. He wasn't planning on writing any more of those stories. Then he wrote Sign of the Four, and he had to reintroduce the character to the public. So even though it takes place 7 years after the first story, it's very much as if they're new roommates again, except that there is that element of friendship. But even their friendship is just like in the beginning phase of the beginning phase of their relationship. And I try to make the sentence that way. And then once the short story started, they were already friends. And in the earliest dated story, Speckled Band in 1883, Holmes introduces Watson as his friend and companion. So the friendship is already strong there. Doyle never shows us that friendship evolving. And Elementary did that. And I think they did that in a very interesting way, and in a way that, is unique, the presentation of Holmes and Watson.
Well, let me make a comment for some of our listeners who might not be aware of this. You said, a couple of minutes ago that one of the things that's really attracted you about Elementary is the work that Jonny Lee Miller has done to create a convincing character around Sherlock Holmes. It's interesting, back in 2011, for a couple of months in England, Jonny Lee Miller and Benedict Cumberbatch starred together in a play, I think, written by Nick Dear of Frankenstein. And the interesting thing is they would alternate in performances according to some schedule. In one performance, Cumberbatch would be the monster and Jonny Lee Miller would be Victor Frankenstein, and then they would reverse that. So the audiences never knew who was going to be in which part. So they had an interesting history of working together. But you said you said something very interesting there about how they take elements in the Sherlockian canon and put them to work in different ways in Elementary. And one of the ways that, you could look at this is to take a look at the characters, how Moriarty, how Kitty Winter, how people like that have featured in the series. And the series, by the way, I think has been picked up now for a 7th season. So for those of us who haven't seen Elementary, can you talk a little bit more about that, about, what's intrigued you and what you remember over these last couple of years about how that's worked in Elementary?
like the fact that they've taken the Sherlockian tropes that we all know and that have existed in the realm of the parallel Holmes, as opposed to the original Holmes, and they've turned them, sideways or sometimes on their head. In case this is a spoiler for anybody, Irene Adler turns out to be Jamie Moriarty in Elementary. Holmes's greatest love is also his greatest enemy, and that works really well in the way it's done in the show, and I enjoyed that one. That's really nice. I also enjoy the fact that they really have a recognition of the character. There was an episode in season 4 where a character who's dressed as a comic book superhero, the Midnight Ranger, gets killed. And to investigate the crime, Sherlock gets all of the comics from fans of the Midnight Ranger, so he could read it to see if there's anything in there that might be reflected in the actual murder. So he gets 648 issues, and he's reading them, and Joan comes in and looks at him and says, "Hey, that's the 10th issue from the 1940s, and you got it out of its bag and you're reading it." And like, she's shocked at the fact that he has this precious, valuable comic out, and he's turning the pages and everything, which is funny in itself. And then he explains that that the Midnight Ranger had been killed several different times in the comic books, and he goes, over the course of 80 years of his daring do, the Rangers have been killed 5 times. Unfortunately, the deaths in the comic involve being sent back in time, buried deep underground, made microscopic, impersonated by an alien, and my particular favorite demise, pushed over a waterfall, locked in the embrace of his nemesis, which it's that little meta clue in there that the writers put in for the audience, but also it recognizes the fact that Sherlock Holmes and the tropes that Doyle invented have been used throughout the years since then, and especially in the comic books where superheroes have supervillains that they fight to the death. And this is the same. It started with Holmes as the scientific detective fighting the scientific criminal.
Yeah, we like to cite the poster from I think it was A Study in Terror, which came out in the mid '60s. At the same time, the Batman craze was on television, and it showed Holmes with pow, biff, thwack, and it said the original Caped Crusader. And when you think about it, that hero mentality has come time and time again. Certainly with Batman, there was even a cover of a Detective Comics with Holmes and Batman sharing the same cover. So I think it's fascinating that the elementary writers engage in this knowledge dropping of what they glean from the Sherlock Holmes stories. And I'm sure they're doing it partially for their own amusement, but also to see if they can hook the fans along the way. I guess you could call them, dropping cannonballs, the series. And from what I've seen, the elementary writers in the media, certainly on Twitter, and they've had some Q&A sessions on certain platforms, are very engaged with the fandom, and in a way that they're almost embracing them. While with Sherlock, you've seen instances where the creators or even some of the actors are trying to distance themselves from the fans. Do you get that sense as you're watching the show?
Yes, I do, and I think that has to do with the fact that BBC Sherlock is a phenomenon, and Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman have become overnight successes with the show. Of course, they've been around for a long time, but still, all of a sudden they've been thrust into the spotlight. The other thing that I find interesting is Sherlock's cadence of episodes of series, or they call them. You had series 1, and then a year and a half until the next one came in, and then you had series 2, and that was another 2 years before the next one. And in that time, the fans really grabbed the characters and filled in the missing time with their own fanfic and slash, and really made those characters, Cumberbatch as Sherlock and Freeman as Watson, their own. And that didn't happen with Elementary. I mean, it's more of just a regular TV show in that sense, although there is, a dedicated fan base that do their own artwork, fan art and fan fiction. But, it's not as big as the BBC Sherlock. And I think it's more manageable for everyone connected with Elementary to deal with.
Well, it doesn't sound like the Elementary team has left much room. I mean, so 6 seasons, there must be over 100 shows, compared to a relative handful for the BBC Sherlock.
Yeah, true. It's like 141, I think, by the end of season 6.
And we're just going to pause here a minute for a brief word from our sponsor. While you've heard the Baker Street Journal called the leading publication of Sherlockian scholarship since 1946, we have a question for you. What does that really mean? It could simply mean that it was the first of its kind. See, before 1946, no one was producing a regular or even irregular collection of scholarship on a regular basis. It could also mean that it's the definitive resource that many Sherlockians turn to when they're looking to delve into ideas, past and present, on issues small and grand in the canon, just like we do over on Trifles. Or it could mean that you've simply exhausted your Google search and arrived at bakerstreetirregulars.com, where you stare in amazement at the myriad of choices before you. Whatever it means to you, it's clearer than ever before. The Baker Street Journal stands out amid a sea of electronic information about Sherlock Holmes as a beacon of some of the most intelligent and thoughtful papers you're likely to read on the Sherlock Holmes stories, films, programs, and more. The real question is this: why don't you subscribe yet? For less than $1 a week, you can have access to all of this and more. Go to bakerstreetirregulars.com and subscribe today.
That's the other thing is, like, they can't, throw in cannon bombs in every single episode. After a while, you'll run out of things to put in there. Even with 56 stories and 4 novels, and also it's a little nooks and corners in the canon. There's only so much you can put in to give to the fans. So a lot of episodes, they don't really have a lot of those mentions, and they're more concerned with the story and the characters. And that's one of the other things I enjoy about Elementary is that this Sherlock and Watson, they evolve over the course of the seasons. They become different people. And you especially saw that in the first season where Sherlock gets out of rehab, and he dresses in T-shirts, or a few episodes afterwards, he actually has a suit jacket on, but it's all wrinkled, like it's been in the bottom of his closet while he's was away, and he wears kind of plaid shirts and things like that. But by the end of the season, he's actually dressed more professionally, and now he wears a shirt without a tie and a suit coat and slacks. So he's evolved from that person who was a heroin addict who didn't really care what he looked like to being back into his profession and looking like a professional. And the relationships that they Sherlock and Joan have also evolved similarly in that way. This season, Joan is looking to adopt a child, and Holmes says to Joan that he would take a bullet for her, and consequently, he would take a bullet for her adopted child as well. And that kind of really, really close-knit relationship didn't exist in the beginning of the first series. They were at loggerheads a lot of the time, and so you see that evolution in the character of Sherlock opening up to friendships where he'd been closed before, and Joan evolving her relationship with him, and her life, that what she's looking at, where she was unsatisfied with being a doctor, and then she was a sober companion, and now she's a detective where she's actually very happy with that role.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is certainly the canon itself has been called a textbook of friendship, as Christopher Morley first stated. But it does take a complete reading of the stories, and in some cases one has to infer what the relationship was or how it actually evolved. We're not actually given direct access to evidence of the friendship. It's circumstantial in some cases. And, when you've got 6 seasons of a show like this, it does give the writers the opportunity to really focus on that friendship and to, to really show that evolution. And there are other relationships too that the show gets into. A couple of family members of Sherlock Holmes. You want to talk a little bit about those and how those are portrayed?
Sure. They introduced Mycroft Holmes in the 3rd season, I believe, and they gave him a story arc, and they made Holmes and Mycroft very much rivals and frenemies throughout their whole childhood. And when Mycroft comes in on the show in the season, he seems to be doing something a little underhanded that Sherlock doesn't know about. It turns out that he, even though he's a restaurateur, which is interesting in the original Mycroft, they've transferred Mycroft's weight into the television Mycroft's love of food, and he was originally according to the show, he was originally overweight, but he had leukemia, and he lost a lot of weight in the meantime, and that's one of the things he never shared with Sherlock, his illness, because Sherlock could have donated bone marrow to help him out, and he didn't bother connect with Sherlock on that. And so that relationship was really well done, and the way they showed the television Mycroft and compared it to the Mycroft that exists in the Greek Interpreter, the way he existed in there, he's not the he's not the Mycroft of the Bruce Parrington plans. He seemed, in Doyle's mind, the character seemed to have evolved in the years when he wrote him, and the writers and the showrunners decided to focus on the Greek interpreter version of Mycroft. And a lot of fans who were Sherlockians didn't really like it. They're used to Mycroft, who is occasionally the British government. Turned out for the television Mycroft that he was actually undercover for MI6 to help break up a international criminal organization. And during the course of that, through Mycroft's incompetence, Joan gets kidnapped by the criminal organization. Both Sherlock and Mycroft have to get together and find her. And since Sherlock is really, really angry at Mycroft for putting Joan in this situation, the sparks fly in their dealings with trying to find the clues to where Joan is. The interesting thing that they did was they separated the Bruce Parrington plans Mycroft and made him Moreland Holmes, the father. And so that character, the father, who's an international business financier who is amoral in what he does and how he gets business done, and he's kind of like how Mycroft is portrayed in the movies and in pastiche. And so having the brother and the father, they're bookends of the Doylean Mycroft, and that's a kind of thing that I enjoyed the way they did that. Although until you met the father, a lot of people thought that the Mycroft character was very weak. But once you had both of those characters developed, you could see the family dynamics, and you can see how within their fictional universe how Sherlock became the way he is. It was
how
really
he was
well done.
Addiction, huh?
I'm sorry, what?
How he was driven to heroin addiction.
Yes, well, they point out that his Sherlock's mother became a heroin addict, and Moreland Holmes disowned her, and she moved and was living in an apartment that caught on fire and died. So Sherlock never forgave his father for that, or he blamed him for that. This season, actually, in light of the evolving characters, turns out that Mycroft has died. He from complications of the leukemia, he ended up dying. Sherlock found this out because he wanted to make amends with Mycroft, and that's when he found out he was dead, and he decided that he needed to make amends with his father too. And it's the way the show did it. It's very subtly done, but that's also a part of the evolving character of Sherlock that really makes the character interesting. And also, if you put it within the canonical context, it's it's a lot different than saying Moriarty was Sherlock's tutor who had an affair with his mother and was killed, and Sherlock's father killed his mother. This is another way of looking at the dynamics of the Sherlock Holmes character and reinterpreting it and placing elements that would work within the canon and also work within the television character.
Mm. Well, speaking of those elements, one of the things that defines Holmes is in the canon is his relationship with the regular police force, with Inspectors Lestrade and Gregson, people like Athelney Jones. How has that translated over into elementary? What are those dynamics like?
Well, he works with Captain Gregson and Detective Bell in the 11th Precinct in New York. And both Gregson and Sherlock respect each other, but they've had their differences too. And because of the way sometimes that Sherlock acts, gotten into trouble with Gregson. Working with Bell, he's actually evolved. The character's evolved from someone that Sherlock just tolerates to Sherlock actually saying that Bell is one of the best detectives that he works with. There was an arc where Detective Bell got shot in the subclavian artery, and he wasn't able to. He had tremors in his hand, his gun shooting hand, and he couldn't work. And he was assigned to a desk for a while, and there was a lot of comic other detectives coming in who Sherlock just couldn't stand at all. They were just really, really bad. So the relationship with Sherlock and Joan with Bell has really evolved over the years, and it's become one of mutual respect.
Well, what do you think is next for the show? Where does it have to go from here?
Well, they're kind of hinting that Sherlock's father, Morland, has taken over Moriarty's criminal empire. So from the inside, he can break it down, because Moriarty is off into the wind. She's escaped from the FBI, and she's off doing her own thing. So the Moriarty organization recognized in Moreland Holmes, his incredible amorality and his success as a businessman, and they wanted him to take over the organization, and he decided to do that, but on the condition that they leave New York, and that they wouldn't have any interference with Sherlock and Joan. And his plan was to work from the inside to destroy the organization. And in this season, Moreland Holmes has come in, and they've talked about that a little bit. And they've hinted that Moriarty wanted to kill him because she knew that he was trying to destroy the organization. But Sherlock reached an agreement with Moriarty. He said that his father won't be living that much longer, and that Sherlock will not go after Moriarty, and Moriarty won't go after Moreland. And so the actress who played Natalie Dormer, who played Jamie Moriarty, she wasn't able to come on to this, so she wasn't a physical presence during this season. But they might work that into season 7 if they're able to bring her back onto the show, which would be really nice. There's a really good dynamic between Natalie Dormer and Lucy Liu as well.
Well, it sounds like there's a really special formula there that certainly the writers have gotten down, and the casting director, the actors who play the characters. I mean, it's obviously an ensemble, a group effort, but it sounds like they've all kind of found their niche, found their momentum, and it's a strong showing, and certainly still has a strong following, and we count you among them on behalf of Sherlockians everywhere, James.
Oh, thank you. If it wasn't good, I'd be happy to tell you that. But I understand though why some people didn't like it when it first first came on, or they they're not interested in watching it. To each his own. Like I said, some people like Mel Gibson as Hamlet. What can you do?
And we try not to associate with those people. Well, if
I'd like a list of names. Can I have a list of those?
If you're
Foster
in more of this, James has a few choice essays on ihearofsherlock.com. We will pick out a few and put them in the show notes. Among them are a Sherlockian analyzes some of the early episodes of Elementary and Elementary and the Hound. Those are two of the fan favorites on our site. We'll put those in the show notes, as well as other things related to the CBS television show. Well, thank you for being here with us.
Well, it just shows you that the characters of Sherlock Holmes have endless permutations and have the ability to attract audiences in so many forms over so many years in so many ways. It's endless.
It is. And, it's really interesting to, kind of survey across the Sherlockian world to see where different interests lie. Because, think about it from the folks that we've talked to over the years who collect things or are interested in a particular genre of Sherlock Holmes books. It becomes very specific. It's almost an imprint of one's personality. And not everyone has to like the same medium or the same type of show related to Sherlock Holmes. And, having people who are passionate about every aspect of it, one way or another, it's what makes us a fun group of people to be around.
Yeah, that's well said. I like that.
All right. Well, that's pretty much all I've got.
Good.
And it's time for the Sherlockian news. What has transpired in the world of Sherlock Holmes and Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts since the last time we talked to you? It's summer, so it's not like there's a lot of news humming all around. But there are a few smidgens of information about the types of things that you might be interested in and I don't know, shows you might want to see, plays you might want to see, etc. So what do we have here?
I noticed, a number of things. First of all, our friend Marguerite Fox, whom we spoke to in the last episode, her book has been garnering some very good press. There's also been some speculation about the forthcoming, I think we talked about this briefly or mentioned it briefly somewhere along the line, the forthcoming Ethan Coen comedy Holmes and Watson, which stars Will Ferrell as Holmes and John C. Reilly as Watson. And I forget when that's coming out, but that's something that we have to...
I think it was too soon was the answer.
Choosing my words carefully. Look forward. Yeah.
Well, look, it can't be any worse than Sherlock Gnomes. I think the only difference is there won't be toys at McDonald's this time around, or Burger King, or wherever they were.
I have to tell you, I missed that completely, and I didn't have to work too hard.
Yeah.
But I'm happy. I'm happy in my ignorance.
Yeah. Well, even with kids, I didn't manage to see it. It wasn't really high on their list either. Well, a couple of moved from the amusing to more of the sobering. Couple of Sherlockians who affected the wider Sherlockian world have passed away. The first being Ron Burt DeWall. Ron DeWall was the author of the World Bibliography of Sherlock Holmes. This was written and edited in a time in the early 70s when there was another boom in interest in Sherlock Holmes, and Ron made it his effort, his work, to document, every instance of Sherlock Holmes in print and in film and, in multiple media. It was really, it was the world bibliography. It was subtitled "A Classified and Annotated List of Materials Relating to Their Lives and Adventures." And, like anything, like any effort in this area, as soon as it's published, it's absolutely out of date, just because people keep producing more and more materials. Related to that as well, fellow Michigander Phil Jones passed away. Phil kept an online database of over 9,000 pastiches in an Excel spreadsheet. He tracked those for a number of years and finally kind of closed the book on that, I think, about a year or so ago. And then finally, Joel Center, who was half of the team behind the Sherlockian E-Times and Classic Specialties. This was the original mail-order Sherlock Holmes ephemera company, where if you wanted something with something related to Holmes on it, whether it was a quote, a picture, a profile of Holmes, and it didn't matter whether it was a scarf or a notepad or a pen or a lapel pin. They had it all. They were like the Amazon of the Sherlockian world before Amazon was there. And Joel passed away just a few weeks ago. So we thank Joel and Ron and Phil for their service to the Sherlockian community.
Amen.
Well, it's that time once again to play everyone's favorite Sherlockian game show. Of course, I'm referring to Canonical Couplets, where we give you a 2-line poem that references some story in the Sherlockian canon, and it's up to you to identify which story that couplet refers to. So, if you remember, last time around in episode 159, we laid this couplet on you. It's better, lads, to stay at home and cram than pilfer questions of the Greek exam. That, of course, refers to the adventure of the 3 students, where the role of Thucydides was stolen and attempted to be copied by one of the students. I believe it was Gilchrist. So there you have it. Well, we had a winner. We had a number of winners, correct responses there. So it is up to us now to spin the big prize wheel and wait for it to come around to see who is the winner. Number 12. Okay, entry number 12 goes to George Fuller. George, congratulations on winning the Canonical Couplet for episode 149. We will reach out and be in touch with how you can claim your prize. And now, everyone's been waiting for the latest Canonical Couplet. So here we go for episode 150. Canonical Couplet is: to send such relics to a nice old lady implies behavior something worse than shady. If you think you know the Sherlock Holmes story referred to in that short poem, jot it down on the back of a $20 bill and send it out. Oh, no, wait, sorry. Send us an email at comment@ihearofsherlock.com and put Canonical Couplet in the title. And hopefully you will be among those who are correct and entered into the drawing for another prize. Thank you very much. We'll see you on the quiz show next week. Well, I can't believe we actually made it through, 150 episodes. Ooh. Where's my Malox?
Well, maybe I'm really excited because having this library behind us, 150 episodes, all those conversations, you think of the people that we've spoken to, Ken Ludwig, all the writers, the people who've broken such great new ground in the Sherlockian world. I'm excited because, one of the things that sort of defined my participation in all of this is that I really haven't been listening to any of these conversations. So now I'm going to go back. And I just can't wait. We've apparently had some great people on here, and I can't wait to find out what they say.
Evidently. Well, one thing I've noticed is as there are mentions of certain people, as there are events, as there are things in the news, it's wonderful to have this library to go back to and to say, hey, we interviewed such and such a person, or we talked about that show or that topic or what have you. So it's a wonderful reference point at this point now where we can just simply look on that archive section, which, by the way, if you want the shortcut to that, you can certainly find it in the navigation of the I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere website, where it says Show Archives, or you can just go to ihose.co/ihose-shows, all lowercase. It'll find you on that master listing of all of our 150-plus episodes. Until we are back here next time doing the 151, that reminds me of some bad experiences with rum in college, 151. Whew. I remain soberly yours, Scott Monty.
And I remain staunchly Burt Wolder.
The game's afoot.
I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.